Hello, I'm starting a T-gauge model railway build called the Dawlish T Wall. I intend for it to go on a shelf above my N-gauge railway, indoor. The starter T-gauge set that I bought came with track that had moulded plastic ballast, but I don't think it looks particularly good. I decided instead to use T-gauge flexitrack along with a more traditional ballasting approach. Even though that might look better than the moulded ballast, I think the rail joiners still stand out like a sore thumb. I wondered if I could use the same technique as I've settled on with the indoor N-gauge layout. The idea is to use a continuous section of flexitrack sleepers across the ends of adjacent rails, and not use fish plates. I decided to try this out before trying to make anything that will be part of the final model. The sleeper moulding is easy to cut, but difficult to slide off, so I don't think I'll be doing this on long sections of track. I filed and chamfered the ends of the cut rails so that they could slide through the sleeper mouldings more easily and with less risk of damaging the sleepers. The magnifying glass that's in shot was positioned for my benefit rather than for the resulting video footage. The result looked quite good. The rails were aligned quite nicely. I had trouble getting one of them to fit onto the last couple of sleepers, so that rail has ended up slightly raised, but I decided that didn't matter for this experiment. Not much of the scenic area track on the Dawlish T Wall is going to be straight, so I had a go at making an S-curve to see how the joins hold up. Happily, it seems fine. The joining of the rails are deliberately in the middle so that they happen on what is a very short straight section. I think this will be good enough for what I've got planned. Part of the reason this works is that once bent, the rails just hold their new shape very well. In that respect, it's so much easier to work with than the N-gauge flexitrack. Each length of flexitrack will be long enough to do an entire 180-degree turn at each end of the track plan, which will be by far the tightest turns on the layout. However, the length of flexitrack that I experimented with came a bit twisted, like a gentle corkscrew, so it wouldn't sit flat on a surface. I wasn't successful in twisting it back into shape by hand. So, the next test, will the seemingly magical Copydex glue be able to hold it flat? Yes, it does. The gaps between the rails were a little large, so as I'd done with the N-gauge track, I pushed the rails through the sleepers from the other end. The alignment is definitely not perfect, as these close-up shots show, but equally I can't see this level of detail in person, so it's not a problem from that point of view. Much more importantly, will my train be able to ride over it? First, I cleaned the track. My starter set, and also each length of flexitrack, came with a fine sandpaper for cleaning track. I want to avoid using it if at all possible. I don't want to use anything abrasive that's going to leave micro scratches that, ultimately, make the track get dirtier more quickly. Then the big test. The loco didn't budge. But that's because I had a moment of being a bit dim. Gaps in the track mean no electrical contact. I then connected both ends of the track. The loco clearly doesn't like one section of track. That's going to need a more thorough clean, but seems to go over the section where the separate rails meet each other just fine. It visibly wobbles over that slightly raised rail, but I'll be more meticulous when building the layout to make sure that rails are all flat. This approach does mean that I need to connect power directly to each rail, which I'd considered earlier even though I forgot about it to start with in that running test. Several months ago, I upgraded my soldering iron to one that allows me to set a temperature and which shows me its current temperature, and I bought some fine tips. I'd tested that it heated up, but this would be its first use for soldering. Helpfully, underneath the track there's a gap between every other pair of sleepers, so I roughed up a section of track, and then forgot which section, then did another one, and left a marker. Again, the magnifying glass was just for my benefit. I got some solder onto the rail. This took lots of attempts, trying higher temperatures and cleaning the soldering tip. I think I went up to about 230 degrees Celsius before I got a bit of solder to stick. I had some very fine wire available, so I got some solder onto a length of that easily enough. I then spent several minutes trying to get that to attach to the rail, but mostly what was already on the rail was just getting desoldered from it. Eventually I did succeed. In the footage I recorded, it was 9 minutes from the first filing to this point where a cable was attached to the rail, so quite a long time for what it is. I was quite happy with the result. Once ballasted, I don't think this cable or its join will be visible. On the underside, the sleepers were a bit melted from all the fiddling with the soldering iron, but the scenic side looked okay. However, it turned out that this one was a fluke. I tried the same again on the other rail, but just couldn't get anything to stick. I tried using a bit of flux, but that didn't really help. I tried on a section of rail that didn't have any sleepers nearby. It wasn't much easier there. Turning the soldering iron up to 400 degrees C helped a lot, but when trying in between sleepers again, the slightest mistake melted them significantly, causing visible damage on the scenic side. This is not what soldering to the N-gauge track had been like, so I did a bit of research. The T-gauge track is steel, presumably stainless steel, whereas the Pico N-gauge track is nickel-silver. Apparently, stainless steel needs an aggressive flux that's phosphoric acid based in order to get through the surface oxides. I shopped around. All of those kinds of flux that I could find in small quantities are shipped slowly from China, so I had to wait a while for some to arrive. It came after I'd finished filming for this video and I haven't tried using it yet. I also bought some protective gloves to wear. From what I've read, I'm not going to want that flux coming into contact with my skin. I read that it's best to use a solder that has some silver in it. That was much easier to find. In the meantime, I thought I'd see if my existing experiment conducts electricity. Without cleaning the rails, there seems to be a drop-off of 0.1 volts, so it works, it's just too difficult to do it without visible sleeper damage. Next up, beginning ballasting experiments. I bought some ballast from tgauge.com. I'd actually bought it with the N-gauge layout in mind, but when it arrived it did look too fine for N. I was being very approximate here. I'm both using this as a bit of a practice and to see if I like this particular type of ballast. I'm not convinced that I do. In the sunshine it has a bit of a sparkle to it, and it has dark flecks throughout it too. I know that real ballast has a range of tones, but I haven't seen it look speckled like this. Ideally, I don't want to have to airbrush ballast. I've also so far failed to get it to sit neatly between the sleepers, so I'm going to try using tile grout instead. I've seen others do that, and it looks good. Thinking more broadly about the layout, this is the area that I'd like to model. Using the distance measurement tool on Google Maps, it says it's 2.5 kilometers. 2 meters at a scale of 1 to 450 is a bit less than 1 kilometer, so I'll need to do some compression. Looking at aerial images on Google and Bing Maps, it seems that about half of this area, if viewed front-on from the sea, is built up and the other half is just cliffs. I think I'll aim for a similar proportion, cutting out buildings, shortening terraces, and shortening the station platforms. I don't mind if a full HST doesn't fit into the platforms. Most long-distance services go straight through. To start getting an idea for the scale of things, I've taken measurements from this photo, using the known gauge of the track as the basis. As with all photos, there's an element of perspective here that's going to distort the measurements, but I don't think it's going to be significant enough to stop me getting things looking right. Standard railway gauge is 1.4 meters. Using that, I've worked out the width of other key elements in this picture. When scaled down by a factor of 450, the size of what I'll need to make comes out. It's going to be quite challenging. That's all for now. Bye bye.